Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite things, Scotch cocktails. Now, before we talk about Scotch cocktails, of course we have to talk about Scotch. We're going to save the deep dive on Scotch to a later segment, but just to cover the basics. Scotch wasn't really an important cocktail ingredient in this country. Up through the 1880s, the only time you drink Scotch is a hot Scotch, or what would later be called a hot toddy, which was literally whiskey, hot water, and the peel of lemon, sometimes some sugar. That was it. Really simple, really straightforward, very satisfying on a cold winter's night. It wasn't until the 1890s, most likely with the arrival of golf and people's idea to explore a little more about Scottish culture, or at least now that I like this game of golf and I have just the right plaids to wear, what do I drink that's refreshing and delicious? And the answer was a Scotch highball. So people started drinking Scotch. The kind of Scotch they were drinking at the time were blended whiskeys. Still, 95% of the market is blended whiskeys. Starting in about the 70s, 80s, we started seeing more of the arrival of single malt Scotches. The Macallan was probably the first big blockbuster brand, but then of course it spread and now we have all kinds of single malts from all over Scotland. One of the things you'll hear people say when you offer them a Scotch cocktail or just a delicious glass of Scotch is that, no, I don't like Scotch, it's too smoky. Well, it can be if you get your Scotch from, say, Islay, which is one of the 5 main regions of Scotch. One of the 5 main regions of Scotland that produce a very distinctive kind of whiskey. The Islay style is always big and peaty. Peat moss is what they burn, and they get the smoke from it, and that's how they fold the flavor in to the grain to make those whiskeys so peaty and bold. But other areas of the country don't make the same style of whiskey. The Highlands specifically makes an easier, far more approachable style. This Dalwhinnie is honey and orange peel. There is no discernible smoke on it at all. So if you like whiskey or if you like cognacs, there's probably more variety across the category of Scotch that you can find something you like. Just fear not, and if you have a good tour guide who won't take you to Islay if you're not quite ready for it yet, I think you can really open up to Scotch and Scotch cocktails. We are going to use mostly blended Scotches in our cocktails with a couple of exceptions, because what you're paying for with the single malts is nuance, is that terroir, is that individuality. And when I say pay for it, you are paying for it. Most Scotches, especially single malts, have good age statements on it. This Dalwhinnie is 15 years. This Laphroaig is 10. This Lagavulin is 16. This version of Glenlivet is 14. So that takes a while, and you're paying for it. Whereas the blends, although they also have some age statements, this Johnny Red does not have an age statement on it, but the Johnny Black does. It's a 12-year whiskey, and that means it's a blend of 12-year and older whiskeys. The youngest whiskey in the blend is 12 years. So these can be really great. The idea that separates the two categories between single malt and blend is that single malt is more terroir driven. It's more like an expression of place. Think of specific wines that you might like all over France, like Burgundy tastes like Burgundy or Bordeaux tastes like Bordeaux. Where blended whiskey, the idea is to make a very consistent product every year, regardless of weather condition. So they buy whiskeys from all over the country and blend them in the way that a champagne house would blend, or in the way that a producer of cognac would blend. So it's a very different skill set, and it's a very different it's a very different aim. They're aiming for a consistent product. So Johnny Black tastes like Johnny Black whether you're in Tokyo this year or in Italy 5 years from now. That is the idea of that, where this is more like, oh no, it's this one little place and it fluctuates more. Okay, well that's just a teaser of Scotch, and we're gonna get into Scotch cocktails next, but I'll say that Scotch was not popular in cocktails in this country for a very long time. Originally, up until about the 1880s, the only time you'd get Scotch is in a hot Scotch, which is basically the original hot toddy, which was whiskey, kind of rough, young whiskey, with hot water and the peel of a lemon, maybe some sugar. So really satisfying for a cold winter night. You definitely knew what you were drinking. And it wasn't until the 1890s with the arrival of golf there became an appreciation in America for, the Gulf and the appropriate plaids to wear on the course. And then what do you drink after a round of golf? Well, the Scotch whiskey looks good, and that's when blends took off in this country. And of course, specifically the drink, the Scotch highball, which was Scotch and soda with lemon. And that is where Scotch cocktails started, and it never really folded into the early pantheon of all of these stirred gin and rye whiskey or even bourbon drinks. But there's certainly room in the category now, but there's not so many classics with Scotch. The good thing about Scotch is that since it wasn't really part of the early canon so much, it's so much fun to play with now and to make up your own riffs. So we're going to go through a couple of classics, a couple of old cocktails, and a couple of new ones.